Well, some of us had an idea that that might have happened. It was Kansas State, and there is a history there in recent years. So, disappointing loss, no question about that, but still much to play for. Again, considering losses to Kansas State and Iowa State in recent years, and still the result of the season, Big 12 championship. So, don't lose hope. We'll talk Sooners for the next 60 here on the Voice of College Football. Please like the video before you get started, before you get settled in and enjoy the next 60 minutes. Please hit the like button. And of course, this all is possible. Our Sooner show and post game every Saturday with Jason Ray from Jason Ray joining us as always. Jason, appreciate you being here.
No problem. Happy to be here, Mark. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, since it's so recent and because we're looking forward to good news today, potentially, why don't we start with the big headliner today and would be for the entire offseason going into National Signing Day in December of the announcement that's forthcoming today.
Yeah, so David DJ Hicks has announced that he will make his announcement today at 3:30 p.m. I think he's actually making it live on ESPN2, I believe, on the College Football Live show is what I've heard, is what I saw a little bit earlier this morning. So I think everybody has followed his commitment. One of the best, probably the best defensive player in the 2023 class. One of the best players, I think, overall in the class. I think right now he sits at number 9 in 247 composite overall. So Oklahoma's been in on him for a while. Obviously, Todd Bates and Brent Venables have a really good, long-standing relationship with him, even going back to Clemson last year in his recruitment there. And then it's continued to flourish with Oklahoma over the last few months through the offseason and then here. So, he's a guy that at the beginning he had planned on, making his announcement at the Under Armour All-American game, but he has pushed it up significantly here in towards the end of September. So I think a lot of that's certainly by design. I don't know that Venables and team have really necessarily pushed him to commit incredibly early, but I think they wanted him if he felt comfortable with where he was at with Oklahoma and the relationship that he had with with the staff and where he felt led to go, to possibly move that up a little bit, just because you get somebody like him in, it's very similar to the impact that Arch Manning had and has had at Texas, right? So you get a probably the best defensive lineman, if he does commit to Oklahoma, the best defensive lineman that Oklahoma has had from a recruiting perspective, probably since Gerald McCoy, and so that's quite some time ago. And so, all signs seem to point to Oklahoma right now for his decision. He's been officially falling to Oklahoma. Then I saw a comment from him this morning that unless something happens drastically different in the next few hours, that he absolutely expects Oklahoma to get that pledge. And so right now Oklahoma's sitting at number 6 in the overall 247 composite. So I think this would probably bump certainly top 5, probably in the 2 to 3 range, I would say, right now, because it's pretty close between where Oklahoma is compared to some of the other teams. They're just when you look at Georgia's at number 2 at 289.81 and Oklahoma's at 6 at 284.29. So you think Oklahoma will make a significant jump, and again, something that's very positive. Oklahoma at this time, close to this time last year, they had the number 1 recruiting class in the country, but it was all offensive players under Riley. And so where Oklahoma could be at the end of the day in a much better position, just in terms of equal talent among the offense and defensive side of the ball. So Oklahoma fans will want to make sure that if you can tune in to ESPN2 this afternoon to check out his commitment.
All right. So some good news, folks. How about that? Most likely good news. Most likely good news. All signs pointed in the right direction for one David DJ Hicks, and the rankings are off the charts for him, as Jason outlined. Appreciate everybody being here. OU Sooners Live. We do this every Wednesday, courtesy Jason Ray. He makes it all happen. I just come along for the ride. You can also catch Jason, of course, after the games. And we hope that since Jason had some other obligations this past weekend, if you missed the post game for Kansas State, it's posted. Jason was on live on Monday. That's one of the big reasons why you subscribe. Then take that other extra step to hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live right there. So, all right, well, let's get to it. I saw quite a bit of it, not start to finish, but I was in and out with some other games on hand. But Kansas State does it again in Norman, led by one Adrian Martinez. Wow, what are your takeaways?
Yeah, Mark, it was really shocking in a lot of different ways, Mark, for me. Just not necessarily that Oklahoma lost the game, because I thought it was going to be a close game. As you mentioned, Kansas State always plays Oklahoma tough. They are, since joining the Big 12, they have played Oklahoma and won more games against Oklahoma than any other team in the conference. So, for whatever reason, and it's not just a Chris Kleiman thing, it was a Bill Snyder thing. It was just for whatever reason, Kansas State, maybe it's the physicality up front that they play with, but on both sides of the ball. But I thought it would be a close game. But the manner in which Oklahoma lost was very troubling, concerning, based on the way that they played at this point through the year. And as we've talked a lot about this, and really kind of leading up to the game last week, Mark, we had talked about on our side that this is the first. Yes, Nebraska was a nice win, but Nebraska's not a great team. They're not even probably what I would call a good team right now. And so this was going to be the first big test, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So, and I mentioned this in my post game, there's a lot of Oklahoma people that were very down on Dylan Gabriel after this game. Even some, mentioned that they believe that he could have been the reason, or one of the main reasons why Oklahoma lost the game. And so I just, just take an opportunity here. Yeah, there were some throws that he missed. Absolutely, he overthrew some guys, and he's got to get better. But at the end of the day, threw for over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, has 11 touchdowns, no interceptions, over 66% completion percentage for the year. Yeah, he can get better, but that's pretty darn good. For your starting quarterback. But I think the two biggest things are the pre-snap penalties on the offensive side of the ball, which continue to kill them, throughout the game. Third down conversion defense gave up almost 50% against Kansas State, and just a lot of defensive regression, it looked like. And you could tell after the game, Mark Venables was really, really frustrated, not necessarily with the loss, not necessarily with the amount of points given up, but the shocking part of it was that, they hadn't seen this through, through fall practice, through, through game prep, and through the first 3 games. They haven't seen a lot of missed tackles, a lot of overrunning plays, a lot of busted assignments. He even mentioned on the very last play, on that 3rd and 16 play, the play that really made it much, much more difficult for Oklahoma to win the game. And then they had a spy covered, and there was a bust. Someone forgot, whoever it was, forgot that specifically he was supposed to spy on Adrian Martinez. And so Mark, you look at a team that gave up over 500 yards, 41 points, was just shocking. I thought, coming into this game, I thought maybe 17 was probably what I would have thought. 17 to 20 was about the most that I thought Kansas State could score on Oklahoma. Yeah, Kansas State is a good team, but they came into this game as the 117th ranked offense in the country. And I think the assumption was if you were able to handle Deuce Vaughn, then you're able to handle Kansas State. Well, they didn't necessarily do obviously either. Deuce Vaughn ran for over 100 yards. Um, I think I saw a stat where Adrian Martinez had more total yards in this game than he has had in the first 3 games combined. So it's just troubling in a lot of ways. You expected a much better Kansas State team that obviously played Tulane the week before, but um, probably not quite this good. So at the end of the day, it's one loss. I mean, you're as a coach, I think this is the thing that makes coaches crazy. Something that you don't see in practice, you don't see in game, and then all of a sudden it happens. All these things happen at one time. So I think going back to the drawing board to a certain degree, right? Just to make sure their assignment sound, and focus on the little things, and all those things on the defensive side of the ball. But now you've got a really tough 2-game stretch here. Obviously, with you go to Fort Worth and face TCU, and then Red River. But all things considered, watching the game and then watching it back a little bit, if you would have told me that Oklahoma ran the ball for 220 yards, they had over I believe 550 yards of total offense, no turnovers, and you score 34 points, I would have thought Oklahoma would have won the game fairly easily. So, and as you have it here on the screen, Eric Gray was phenomenal in the running game. But what really
no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees are another reason
is what comes out is on the left side of your screen. Adrian Martinez had over what was that? Some quick math: 391 yards, 381 yards of total offense, just by himself. No sacks, very little pressure, almost 300 yards rushing. So you gotta put this game, majority of it, on the defensive side of the ball. The third down conversions, but I think still at the end of the day, with all that being considered, Mark, you still had an opportunity. You had them back at 3rd and 16 with a chance to get the ball, down one possession to tie or send the game into overtime, or whatever would have happened.
Don't surrender to the skip button or your final.
And you thought you had that opportunity, but you don't. So, anyways, Oklahoma needs to, as you mentioned, it's not the end of the season, right? It's Oklahoma has recovered from these types of losses in the past, early season losses to Kansas State, early season losses to Iowa State, and then have come back and still not only competed for, but have won a conference championship. So that's not out of the realm of possibilities. Now the Big 12 is more, it's better than it's ever been from top to bottom. But I think the one thing that a lot of people just need to, I think, understand here, and I mentioned this on the post game, but I think most people thought Oklahoma's ceiling probably was a Big 12 championship game. Now, me and you both thought this team could possibly, and they still could possibly squeak into the playoffs, but they weren't going to win a game in the playoffs. If things align, they had one blemish and they won the Big 12 championship, they probably would put themselves in position for a 4 seed or a 3 or 4 seed in the playoffs. But they're probably not where they can win a playoff game yet. But I think this team still has the opportunity to go and win a Big 12 championship. But they've got to make sure that consistency on the defensive side is good, and get rid of some of those pre-snap penalties. Those things shouldn't happen in Game 4, particularly at home. On the road, maybe it's a little bit of a different situation, but at home, that's something that you absolutely wouldn't expect. So we'll see how they bounce back. It's going to be really interesting for me. The first bit of adversity that this team has faced since Venables has been here on the field, and so it will be interesting to see how the kids bounce back from the loss.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I'm usually able to post those other screenshots from other sites and not get the audio keep clicking in, even though I keep silencing it, but wasn't able to keep it up there. So anyway, uh, yeah, the amount of criticism hurled at Dylan Gabriel, I saw 2/3 of the game. And yeah, I noticed him missing throws downfield. A certain percentage of that is going to happen to anyone, but it all seemed to come down on him on social media and every place where I looked after the game, and I just certainly didn't see it that way, considering the offense they were playing and their inability to move the ball the week before, and Oklahoma's early season success on the defensive side and Brent Venables' ability uh, to scheme on that side of the ball. I know that this matchup has obviously been a difficult one for Oklahoma and has been a high scoring game over this course of 4 or 5 years. But with the personnel moves being made and the coaching changes, yeah, 41 points and over 500 yards of total offense took me by surprise for sure. I thought that Kansas State may win a 21-20 game or something in that range.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I thought it would be closer than the spread indicated. 13.5, I think, is what it ended up at, and just the way those teams have played each other. But yeah, no, I mean, I think the one thing that you have to have optimism about for the rest of the season is I have a lot of respect for Kansas State's defense. Kansas State has a pretty solid defense, and Oklahoma was able to put up 550 yards and 34 points, even with the penalties, even with some of the overthrows and things like that. So, but yeah, I think Oklahoma fans are. I don't think I know Oklahoma fans are just so incredibly spoiled at the quarterback position over the last 10 years, and just overall, just in general, since Bob Stoops came in 1999. Oklahoma has had a phenomenal stable of quarterbacks, but you can't get much better than 11 touchdowns, no interceptions, and really not even close to a turnover. Maybe one pass in this Kansas State game that I remember that the receiver did a really good job of kind of blocking out the defensive back, but really hasn't come close to a turnover in 4 games. And so I mean, you know what you have with Gabriel to a certain degree. He's not quite as elusive and quick, obviously, as Caleb Williams. Doesn't necessarily have the arm strength of a Spencer Rattler, and he's not Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield, but that he's a he's played well from my perspective, but just obviously some of those slant passes that he overthrows, obviously he'll still work on those, and it'll get there. But yeah, you've got to be optimistic about Oklahoma's offense after this game, but we'll see if the defense can get back on track.
We hope to be joined soon by Melissa Treepwasser. She writes for Frogs Today to set us up for the TCU matchup. Yes, TCU, the Horned Frogs, not necessarily playing the toughest of opponents leading into this game, but they did erase a 2-year losing streak to TCU or to SMU last week, and knocked off really their first challenger of the season, 42-34 in that one. They won a game earlier against Colorado and an FCS opponent. So we'll talk some TCU football and what it looks like under Sonny Dykes in the matchup here against OU. A lot of comments in the live chat there, Jason, about OU looking slow, and in particular on defense. Do you have any thoughts about the speed on defense?
No, I mean, I don't think that's an issue. I think you've got kids that are playing in positions that maybe aren't aren't as good as you've seen like Brent Venables led defenses in the past, and maybe that's a little bit. I think Justin Broyles is a guy that he got picked on a little bit Saturday against Kansas State. He's had an up and down career. I think most Oklahoma fans will remember him when he was forced into action against LSU, and he continuously got toasted by Burrow and Justin Jefferson in that game a lot. But I think over the last half of last year, he came on and he played really well. He's played better early in the season, but he did not play well at all in this game on Saturday. And so I think a lot of people have to still understand defensively that this staff is still, by and large, for the majority of the players on the team, are still playing with other coaches' recruits, and that's going to still be the case to a certain degree for the first couple of years. So, unless you have an influx of freshmen that kind of get on the field, so I've heard this said a couple of times that the old saying that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So there's going to be these games, I think, this year for Oklahoma. I think there's going to be games where Oklahoma looks phenomenal on the defensive side of the ball, and then I think there's going to be games where they look like this and they look like something of a version of last year, right? So I don't think I don't think Oklahoma is really necessarily lacking from a speed perspective. That they weren't lacking in speed specifically against Nebraska. Whether you say that they're a good team and are not offensively, they still have a lot of speed, right? They still have a lot of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. With Casey Thompson, and then you look at where they're at running back and wide receiver perspective. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes, how it continues to go. Now to Matt's point here, I mean, I'll defend Gabriel to a certain degree, but he's not. I mean, he's obviously not on the Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud level, not even close. But I know that there was, and a lot of Oklahoma fans are going to continue to compare. Right now, his stats are a little bit better than what Caleb Williams are from a statistical perspective. So I know that's always going to be a comparison. But he is what he is, right? Like he's going to be a more than a game manager. He's a solid, serviceable quarterback in this system, and that's going to put up a lot of stats. He's not going to wow you with arm strength. He's not going to wow you with athletic ability, but he's gonna put the ball for the most part in the right spots, and he'll do he'll do what you need him to do. But there's more. For me, there's more, I guess, after this game concerned on the defensive side. So we'll see if they're able to kind of level that out. But like I said, I think you'll continue to see games where Oklahoma looks really, really good on the defensive side, and then there might be some games where, hopefully not to this degree, 41 points and over 500 yards offense, but there's games that they won't play quite as well. You won't have that level of consistency just yet.
And I've got to admit, I know next to nothing about TCU at this point in the season, although I'm looking at their box score against SMU and some names jump out that we're familiar with from recent seasons. Max Duggan won the starting quarterback job. I thought actually he got beat out. I'm going to have to look this up and see if the starting quarterback got hurt.
Yeah, he got hurt. Chandler Morris got hurt in the game of the year. Yep.
Exactly. So Dugan, I've heard it pronounced both ways, even on TV broadcast. 22 of 29, 278, 3 touchdowns against SMU. And this was quite the entertaining game that they jumped out 14-0. Then it became a dogfight after that. Tay Barber's been around that program for quite some time. He had 4 catches against SMU. Kendra Miller had 142 yards rushing, 17 carries. So, yeah, TCU untested to date. This is, of course, going to be the best team that they've played, but they did face a pretty decent SMU team that had lost by just a touchdown late in the game against Maryland the week before. So, probably a top 40 team in the country. And TCU gets it done last week against Tanner Mordecai. Of course, another familiar name there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't watch a ton of that TCU game, but at a high level, it looks like Duggan, however you want to pronounce it. He looks like he's throwing the ball a little bit better than he has in the past. You mentioned the competition, but for the season, he's completing 77% of his passes, 8 touchdowns, no interceptions. So I think what we kind of expected under Sonny Dykes to a certain degree, playing better on the offensive side of the ball, but still giving up a decent amount of yardage and points. Obviously, you've got two, the FCS team, Tarleton State, I believe is who it was, and then Colorado is one of the worst. Well, the worst. I would probably say at this point, Power 5 team.
Yeah.
So not a ton of competition there. So we'll see how that translates to their first game of the season, our first Big 12 game of the season, I should say.
Beyond that, going to the entire conference, this was a weekend where the Big 12 really stepped up. I don't know that anybody's going to be wowed by necessarily the teams that they beat, but if you consider the out-of-conference play, the Big 12 is winning its fair share of matchups outside the conference. And what we had this past weekend was, of course, Kansas won against Duke. And pretty much everybody else played in conference. But looking over the last 2 weekends, and again, the TCU-SMU matchup also comes to mind. And West Virginia beat Virginia Tech. So there's 3 decent matchups outside the conference, and they all went the Big 12's way. And really, when you add it all up, I've got my conference rankings out. When we just look at not necessarily what we think about these conferences, but just go strictly by the results on the field, I think the Big 12 is playing second to the SEC right now and just flat out results on the field out of conference play.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I would say the same. Now, I would say when you look at top to bottom, absolutely. When you, I don't know that the Big 12 has a team as good as Ohio State or Michigan at this point, but I think you're right. When you look at top to bottom, I think the Big 12 is the second, playing the second best or the second toughest to SEC to the SEC, and you look at the rankings and stuff like that. Like it's mind-boggling to me that Kansas is not actually ranked, and the only reason they're not ranked is because it's Kansas. Because you're 4-0, you've won. The teams that you've beaten, Houston, Duke, and West Virginia, with 2 of those being on the road. So I mean, they have an opportunity again this weekend. They host Iowa State to possibly get to 5-0, and I think they host Texas Tech the next week. So wouldn't be out of the realm of craziness here to assume that Kansas could potentially get to 6-0. But yeah, no, the Big 12, even West Virginia getting a win at Virginia Tech, as you'd mentioned there, and so the Big 12 is going to a certain degree, I think they're going to beat up on each other, to some degree through this year, and you got a big one on Saturday with Oklahoma State and Baylor as well. So that'll be interesting to see as you start to see the pecking order take place to obviously early in the first couple of weeks of the conference season. But yeah, the top to bottom, this Big 12 is playing better than probably it has in a long time.
Yeah, at this stage in the season, whether you're trying to justify a top 25, which I try to do every week when I release that and get all sorts of criticism, and that's fine, or conference rankings, there's always this game that's played when you say, well, Kansas has beaten Houston, West Virginia, and Duke. Well, how good are those teams? Who have they beaten? Well, we've only played 4 games. So really, it's hard to find a team that's beaten anyone that has beaten anyone else. There's everybody's playing a lot of FCS games in group of 5 against lower tier group of 5s. So there's only so many quality games. So you have to make some assumptions that, and they're reasonable assumptions, that is West Virginia great? Is Houston great? Is Duke great? No. But they're all pretty capable teams that were winning their other games, some of them. Duke came in at 3-0. They beat Northwestern. Is Northwestern any good? No. But Duke's winning its games. And so Kansas is able to win that game and really control the game. I know they only won by 8, but I caught some of that. And they seem to be in control of the game. And all the action I saw, Kansas was winning every play of that game. Again, Houston, if Houston's good enough to take Texas Tech to overtime, then they're pretty good. And Kansas beat them by 3 scores on the road. And then West Virginia. Is West Virginia great? No, they're not a great team. Probably will not contend in the Big 12, but they're a top 50 team in the country. I don't think there's any question about that. They're in that range. They were good enough to go to Pitt, throw the ball down to the 1-yard line to try to go to overtime. So you got to be a pretty capable, talented team to play some of these results. And if Kansas is winning those games against those opponents that have proven at least to be competitive against decent teams, then I don't get it either. I don't understand. It's difficult to find 3 wins for anybody in the country that are that good. And that's why I've got Kansas ranked in the top 10.
Yeah.
And while people flip out, understand, I don't believe that they're one of the 10 best teams in the country, but I believe that their resume is one of the 10 best right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry, Jason, 25-5 for the Big 12. That's their out of conference record. And yeah, just like every other conference, that's padded with a lot of cake games, but that's with every conference. And most of these other conferences have lost 10 and 12 games outside the conference. And again, for the Big 12, it's 25-5. It's 7-4 against the Power 5. It's 10-1 against the Group of 5. So they've dominated the Group of 5, which they should. And of course, the one loss was Kansas State against Tulane. But I think it's been a really strong season for the Big 12. And they have 2 significant near misses with Texas, Bama, and Baylor, BYU, or it could really be an outstanding run outside the conference.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And as you mentioned, in Kansas game against Duke, just to go back on that one, I watched a large majority of that one as well. And Kansas, you're right, Kansas controlled the game pretty much throughout. Wasn't really from my perspective. I don't know that the game was really ever in doubt on the Kansas side. So yeah, we'll see how that continues. Jalen Daniels is playing at a very, very high level for them at quarterback. 11 touchdown passes, only 1 interception. I think he's got over 300 yards rushing on the season. So when you start getting really high quality quarterback play, that changes things. I think just looking here against Duke, 19 out of 23. 328 yards, 4 touchdowns through the air. So, like I said, he's playing at a high level, and they are playing at a high level on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they're still struggling. They don't have the athletes, but they're going to be able to not only be in some of these games, win some of these games, but keep a lot of them close just because of how good they're performing on the offensive side of the ball. And you look up and down, like I said, when you look up and down the Big 12 roster, you look at, I think a lot of people thought West Virginia and Texas Tech right now are probably the two worst teams in the conference. And Texas Tech upsets Texas on Saturday, and as we mentioned, West Virginia goes to Virginia Tech and wins that game. And really, again, very much like Kansas. I mean, the game ended up being pretty significant just in terms of the point spread towards the end of the game. But even early on, West Virginia pretty much controlled that game from second half for the entire second half. So it's going to be an interesting conference race. And Iowa State even they played Baylor tough, got down big, but then came back. And so it's going to be one of those things where it's going to be a tough game every Saturday. There's no weekends off from here on out for sure.
Oklahoma TCU coming up at noon Eastern time, of course, 11 a.m. where it counts. TCU coming in at 3-0. We got Melissa Treebwasser on the line. Melissa, how you doing? Oh, we can't hear you. I don't know.
Let's try that again. I'm doing
There you
well.
are.
How are you guys?
Doing great. Good to see you. It's been a long time.
Has been a while.
Absolutely. You can join Melissa on Frogs Today. What have you been up to?
We're just enjoying a 3-0 start and made the move over to Frogs Today. And we're doing lots of great stuff over there. Lots of multimedia, podcasts, video work, coaches show, all kinds of great stuff. So it's been a lot of fun.
That is really cool stuff. Well, tell us about this team that a lot of people across the country haven't seen yet, but they're going to get familiar with TCU on Saturday, coming in at 3-0. We got a familiar name back at quarterback, though.
Yeah, I think that Max Duggan, the things that came out of him in fall camp are just consummate professional. He's a guy who started almost 30 games coming into the season, lost the starting job to Chandler Morris ahead of the Colorado game. And then when Morris sprained a knee in the third quarter, stepped in and has just been a completely different quarterback for TCU so far this season. His accuracy, his fit in the Sonny Dykes, Garrett Riley offense has been incredible. And he's just making really good decisions with the football. Doesn't have the turnovers that plagued him and is making the throws that he needs to make. So it's been great. I think for those of us that have followed his career, Max, his intangibles, his leadership, all of those qualities that you want your quarterback to have, he's always possessed, but he's putting it together on the field now too. And he's definitely got the weapons to do so. I think he'd be even better if he got a little bit of protection from the offensive line, but he's made the most of this opportunity and this situation. And with Chandler Morris set to dress for Oklahoma's game, I think Sonny Dykes is going to have another really difficult quarterback decision to make in the coming weeks.
Yeah, if anybody knows Max Duggan's story, he's an easy guy to root for. He's faced a lot of real life adversity, and wow, he has come through a lot to accomplish what he's done, and he keeps bouncing back from a football standpoint as well. So Sonny Dykes wins this matchup 2 consecutive years on the SMU side. Then he comes to the good side, to TCU, and of course get it done 42-34 last week. Before we move on with the 22 version of the Horned Frogs, I'm curious because obviously you were a big supporter of Gary Patterson, of course, did a phenomenal job, built this program, made it a national power. I've always ranked him extremely high among coaches' rankings. He was phenomenal. There was a drop-off probably starting in that 2017 season. They made the Big 12 championship game, and then after that, recruiting wasn't quite as good as it was, and maybe the quarterback situation not what it had been. So just your thoughts about where the program was when Gary Patterson moved on and Sonny Dykes taking over.
Well, I'll correct one small thing on that. Recruiting actually has been exceptional since that 2017 season, which has made the last 4 years, I think, even more disappointing. So when you look on paper, the 4-star talent, even the couple of 5-star guys TCU's been able to bring in has not translated to wins on the field. And so, Gary Patterson did more for TCU than any singular person, not just from an athletic standpoint, but for the university as a whole. But I think that, like everything, there comes a time for change, and change is inevitable. And what Jeremiah Donati, our athletic director, did in bringing in the polar opposite of Gary Patterson in every way, I think has boded really well for TCU. TCU was signing great talent, but Sonny Dykes is a great recruiter. And I think that there's a difference there. He's hired a staff that's young, energetic, that has made recruiting their number one focus and priority. And so not only are they continuing to sign high-level players, especially with how late he came in last year, but they understand how to build TCU back into a brand that young people want to be a part of. And that's part of it too. He also is very open. TCU was one of the most locked down programs in the country over the last 20 years. It was like Fort Knox getting into their practice, and Sonny Dykes has really just thrown open the gates to practice, to publicity. I mean, we've got true freshmen giving interviews on media days, things that just were unimaginable. Assistant coaches are accessible. You can talk to them anytime. Just a completely different environment and atmosphere around the program. How that's going to translate to wins on the field. I mean, I think this year, despite the 3-0 start, most people are kind of expecting, hey, let's get to a bowl game. Let's maybe get to 7 wins and just get this program back on the right track. But for Sonny Dykes to fully get TCU back to being a nationally ranked program, it's going to take some time. After so many years of success, the last 4 years have really been a struggle for the Frogs in every aspect. And so the energy, the enthusiasm around the program, the swagger that this team has, and just the joy that they play with, I think that's been kind of the biggest parts of these turnaround that not only the fan base, but the media has noticed. And so if he can translate that into wins as well, there's nothing keeping TCU from being one of the powerhouse programs in the new look Big 12, other than the fact that they just have to go out there and prove it on the field.
Yeah, so Melissa, just one question I have here off the front, just from the outside looking in, from the Oklahoma perspective. TCU relatively untested, on the young side.
Very, very untested. They haven't played anybody with a pulse.
Do have a little bit of respect for SMU, especially what they've been able to do offensively. But coming into this game, against Oklahoma had played a lot better defensively first 3 games. Then game 4 against Kansas State, not so much. They kind of regressed a little bit. What are some of your kind of key matchups on your side, and what you think the kind of the outlook of from a TCU perspective, looking in at this Oklahoma team this week?
I think the biggest thing that I'm concerned about is just the offensive line play. It's certainly better than it's been the last couple of seasons, but that's been one of the biggest issues that TCU has faced on that side of the ball. I mean, they've had great running backs. They've had great wide receivers. They've had good enough quarterback play, but the protection has still just been substandard. And I think that that's something that's going to turn around, but it's going to take time. Again, they've recruited well at the position. They've lost some guys to the transfer portal, but they just haven't come together to play as a unit yet. And I think the talent is there. They've gotten better each week, but you saw it on Saturday against SMU, which isn't exactly known as a defensive powerhouse even. And Max was still kind of running for his life most of that game, which is why I don't expect Chandler Morris to play on Saturday. But I think that if they can open up some holes, if they can pass protect, and if they can get that running game going early, that's going to go a long way into giving TCU the opportunity to keep up offensively with Oklahoma, which might be a different type of team than it was under Lincoln Riley, but can still put up some points. I mean, that's for sure. That hasn't been the issue. I'm also really excited to see what TCU secondary, or maybe not excited, maybe terrified of what TCU secondary does against Oklahoma wide receivers. I think with Mims and Theo Weiss out there, just 2 of the most talented, physically gifted receivers in the country. And with Travius Hodges-Tomlinson matched up against Rashee Rice on Saturday, was a bad matchup for TCU. Rice was either making plays or drawing penalty flags. Maybe some of those were a little bit kind of iffy, but when you have a big physical receiver with a big name like that, they're going to get those calls. And so I'm interested to see what Joe Gillespie does with Josh Newton, who's arguably been TCU's best player in the secondary so far this season, and how many of those one-on-one matchups we see versus how much safety help TCU gives over the top. I think Bud Clark is expected to be back in the lineup on Saturday at the safety position. That'll go a long way towards shoring up that back end. But the Frogs have been vulnerable to the big play, which again is something that's plagued them throughout the Gary Patterson years. But the 3-3-5 is built to kind of take that away. Dylan Gabriel can connect on a couple of those big throws early with the running game that the Sooners have. I think that could spell trouble for TCU.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm sorry, Mark, but just one little comment here. I think it's interesting. I think Oklahoma fans are just sick and tired of seeing these big score games. And unfortunately, I think the way this is trending is this will probably be another shootout. I think, to your point, in terms of maybe the weaknesses on both teams is probably the defensive side of the ball. And so I think offensively, it looks like both teams have an opportunity to put up a lot of points. in this game. And as you mentioned, maybe Oklahoma's offensive line, has over the last couple of years have not played as well. They've seemed to kind of solidify themselves over the last couple of games here. Ran for over 200 yards. So maybe it'll end up being one of those games in which defense can force a key mistake, key turnover, key interception at some point. But I expect this to be kind of an up and down close game, fourth quarter game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to be so interesting because if you go back to this matchup a season ago, TCU fans were apoplectic because Gary Patterson punted from the Oklahoma side of the field on like a 4th and completely changed the complexity of the game. But the one thing Gary Patterson it's consistent, and he was always going to play to the defense's advantage, which going into games against Oklahoma, especially under Lincoln Riley, was not often going to be a successful way to approach. Whereas Sonny Dykes is certainly willing to just keep throwing the football, keep trying to move the ball down the field. And I think he'd be, honestly, TCU's chances are better if this game turns into a shootout versus a defensive battle, because I just don't think the Horned Frogs have the depth or really the comfort in this system to be able to slow Oklahoma down enough to make this a defensive win. I think you're going to have to put 40 on the board. And I think the first team to get to 40 on Saturday probably has the advantage and ultimately the win.
So unless Jason has anything else, Melissa, before we let you go, for people watching TCU for the first time on Saturday, and that's going to be a lot of people with an ABC game starting the day, are there a couple guys on each side of the ball to look out for that may not have enough recognition that may splash this season?
Yeah, I think, Kendra Miller is probably one of the more underappreciated offensive talents in all of college football. If you watch what he did in the first half against SMU and some of the games that he had last year, Texas Tech comes to mind. He is an absolute talent. He's currently leading the country in yards per carry. I think it's 7.9, edging out Zach Evans, a former TCU Horned Frog who's now playing at Ole Miss, by 0.1 yards a carry. Nobody's paying attention to that, I'm sure. But he's a great player. But the offensive player, if you like fun football, the guy to keep your eye on is Darius Davis. He's a 5th-year senior who is a special teams maven. I think he's tied the career record for return touchdowns at TCU. Last Saturday, and on a kind of a little screen pass, bubble sweep type thing, he hit the fastest recorded speed in football, like in the NFL or in college football this season, at almost 24 miles per hour. And so if he gets loose in the open field, he's gone. I mean, you can pretty much throw up the deuces. You're not catching him. So those are the two guys on offense that I'll be paying attention to. I'd love to see Quentin Johnston get going, but I think most people know who he is. Defensively, I mentioned Josh Newton, the transfer from ULM, just a guy that not a lot of people had heard of. He's been great this season, arguably, like I said, TCU's best defensive player. And Marcel Brooks might make an appearance back from injury as well. That's the emotional leader for TCU. So even if he's dressed and doesn't get a lot of action, he's a guy to keep an eye on the sidelines, because he'll be the one firing everybody up for sure.
Well, that sounds like the TCU of old. They always seem to have like one or two of the fastest players in the country.
Yeah. And Darius Davis is big time fast. Like if there is any green in front of him, I mean, he's Kavonte Turpin-esque when he has the ball in his hands. And I think he's got a chance to be one of those guys that gets an NFL camp invite just based on what he can do in the return game alone.
All right, everyone, you can catch Melissa's work there at Frogs Today. Is there anything else we need to know about what you got going over there, or anything you would like to direct people over there?
Yeah, I mean, I think check out our YouTube channel, subscribe there. Just the access and the ability. One of our main guys is Brian Estridge, who's the voice of TCU. And so we do a great coaches show with Sonny Dykes, and Reagan Peebley, our women's basketball coach, has a podcast. Lots of great opportunities for people to get that inside look at TCU, the behind the scenes, behind the veil, and all the stuff that we wish we could have seen for the last 20 years.
You were right about Sonny Dykes, though. Shoot, when we had like 100 subscribers here, I've had him on here 3 times. How do you get a major college football coach to come on a show like this? It's just, he's a great guy.
The thing that, and again, like we owe so much to Gary Patterson. I'm not going to speak ill of him, but the Sonny Dykes is one of the best human beings on the planet. I was talking to somebody when he did his coaches show at the restaurant. He took time to greet every employee, every fan that was there. Left a significant tip for the folks working the show, despite the fact he, just had a water while he was on set. He's legitimately one of the nicest people in college football.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Melissa. We appreciate your time. Appreciate you being here. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you guys too. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you, Melissa.
Good stuff. All right, we got the TCU side there. All right. I don't know what the spread is on this game. Have we checked that out? You have any idea? I'm gonna go. Where's the game played? Dallas Fort Worth?
Yeah, it's at TCU. Yeah.
I'm gonna go 18.5.
Oh, you're way off, my friend.
Am I?
It's like 5 or 6, I think.
Really?
Yeah, 5 or 6.
Wow.
Let me look at the latest.
Man, I usually can hit a point spread, but man, I
Yeah,
was lost on that one.
you're right on.
Yeah, 6.5.
Um,
Wow.
so yeah, it's interesting. I think there's not a lot of respect, I think, given to this Oklahoma team right now, and I think to some degree with good reason based on what happened last week. So, and not knowing how Oklahoma might react to what happened last week. So yeah, it'll be very interesting. I hope it's not a high scoring game, but I think probably it seems to lend itself to being a little bit more of a high scoring game this week. So we'll see how it goes.
Sooner Cowboys, that's pretty much exactly what we're talking about right there. That is the big question. So we've got a new coach, new head coach anywhere, but a new coach to this program. And this is the first game they've lost. So how do they respond? Exactly. How do they respond? Some teams come out and that slaps them in the face. They get over thinking that they can just run out there against anyone, roll out the helmets and win the game, and it slaps them back into shape to focus on details. We saw 5 false start penalties at home. And so those things get cleaned up. Other teams may start to doubt themselves and think, okay, we thought we were really good. Now we lost to this team. They start to doubt themselves to a certain extent. And obviously each player is different, but it all collectively adds up to something on either side of that spectrum of how a team responds to a loss. But we're going to find out against a very unproven team that showed indications of being decent, not great, but decent in beating SMU for the first time in 3 years last week. All right, Jason, anything else you've got for us?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, it'll be an interesting game here on Saturday. See Oklahoma rebounds. Critically important game for Oklahoma, like they all are when you're chasing the championship, but critically important as Oklahoma, heads into Red River next Saturday. You don't want to be 0-2 and coming into that game. And then your season could take a violent turn in a very quick fashion. So this is a really, really important game for Oklahoma to not only to win, but to start playing a little bit better on the defensive side and just playing more fundamentally sound across the board.
And everyone, of course, again, as Jason outlined off the top, we've got the DJ Hicks announcement coming this afternoon. So be looking out for that. Make it on back for Oklahoma Sooners Live next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. And of course, Jason's got the post game for OU and TCU coming up on Saturday. So please join Jason and bring your comments and questions following OU's matchup with TCU as just a 6.5-point favorite. All right. Jason, appreciate you doing this, making this happen now 82 consecutive weeks. Wow. But thanks so much for your help and for being here and making this go.
No problem. Happy to do it, Mark. Happy to be here.